to Session 5 of the Furman Prison Education Partnership's inaugural speaker series, Behind and Beyond Bars, Perspectives on the U.S. Prison System. I'm Laura Morris, and along with Sally Morris-Cody, we co-direct FPEP. During tonight's program, we invite you to participate by submitting your questions using the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Toward the end of the program, Furman student Jordan Zahora will ask our speakers a few of your questions. Before I hand it over to Furman student Ali Hermetz to introduce tonight's speaker, I want to give a brief introduction to FPEP. FPEP launched in 2018 with two goals. First, to bring transformative higher education opportunities to university students, incarcerated students, and students recently released from prison, bringing them into classrooms together as equals to engage in dialogue and learn from people with whom they might not otherwise interact. Second, FPEP aims, through events like this one, to inform thought and action in the Furman community and around issues of mass incarceration and reentry. Through our student group on campus, we offer students opportunities to engage with, learn from, and support incarcerated students at our partner institution, Perry Correctional, a prison in Pelzer, South Carolina. If you're interested in learning more about FPEP or becoming involved with our work, visit our website or email us at fpep@furman.edu. The link to the website will be posted in the chat box and displayed on the screen following the end of this presentation. Now, I am happy to welcome one of the Furman students involved in FPEP, Ali Hermetz, to give one more announcement and introduce our speaker for tonight. Ali?
Hi, I'm Ali Hermetz, and before introducing tonight's speakers, I'm excited to announce that the student-run side of FPEP, the Undergraduate Prison Education Program, in partnership with Furman Justice Forum, is holding our first book drive for the students at Perry Correctional Institution. The book drive starts today and will run through the end of exams, and we will be collecting both textbooks and regular books. This book drive will allow us to provide educational material to people whose needs are often overlooked and who have much more limited access to information and educational opportunities than we have at Furman. Look out for the purple donation boxes located in Trone, the library, and Daniel and Earl study lounges in South Housing, and encourage your friends to donate a book or two as well. And now I am pleased to introduce Dr. Katy Ryan and Ms. Rayna Momen. Katy Ryan is a professor of English and an Eberly Family Professor of Outstanding Teaching at West Virginia University. Her research and teaching focuses on the history and literature of imprisonment in the United States. She is the founder and president of the Appalachian Prison Book Project, an educational justice nonprofit in Morgantown, West Virginia. Rayna Momen is a sociology doctoral candidate at West Virginia University. They are a longtime volunteer with the Appalachian Prison Book Project and a trained inside-out prison exchange instructor. Momen is dedicated to reducing the harms of the criminal legal justice system through advocacy and policy change, and by helping increase access to books and education for directly impacted people. I hope you all are as excited as I am to welcome these two dedicated advocates to speak to us tonight.
Thank you so much, Ali. It's such a pleasure to be here. I want to extend my thanks to Dr. Morris and to Dr. Morris-Cody for this invitation. Again, Ali, thank you for that beautiful introduction, and to Jordan and Lauren and Elise who are helping with the chat, and probably others behind the scenes. So thank you all. It's an honor to participate in the inaugural year of FPEP. I know how busy everyone is, how exhausted everyone is. And so Rayna and I appreciate so much you being here. Prisons in Appalachia are often beyond the reach of my GPS, surrounded by hills, off the main roads, amid steep elevation changes. The land bears the scars of resource extraction and environmental harm. Some prisons were built on former mining sites or near active coal ash dumps. You turn a bend on a country road and are met with a fortress of barbed wire and gun towers. Deer, woodchucks, turkeys make their way around fences. What does it mean to create education in a place of trauma? How does it change the place? Does it Does it change the educational model? And how do we keep doing this work in the face of terrible grief? In his poem, When I Think of Tamir Rice While Driving, Dwayne Betts is haunted by the killing of the 12-year-old and by, quote, the strength that lets Tamir's father, mother, kinfolk resist the temptation to turn everything they see into a grave and make home the series of cells that so many brothers already call their grave. In response to the murder of George Floyd last summer, Dwayne Betts made a connection that I think we have to keep making. We wouldn't know George Floyd's name if he'd been roughed up, booked for that check and given 5 years. He'd be dying of COVID in a cage, but no one would be in the street. I begin here as a way of summoning a larger community of struggle that contextualizes the work we do at APBP. I want to give you an overview of that work, share some major developments, and end with current challenges. And I really look forward to your questions. APBP grew out of my first graduate course in prison studies and the history and literature of incarceration in the United States. And Dr. Morris was a student in that class. As we read stories, essays, memoirs, and poetry by incarcerated people, we were struck by a pattern or a through line in the literature. And that was the importance of access to books. Malcolm X reading the dictionary from A to Z, Jimmy Santiago Baca in a county jail stealing a textbook and falling in love with Wordsworth poetry. He writes, I crawled out of stanzas. Assata Shakur describing the company of books. Me and James Baldwin are communicating. His fiction is more real than this reality. I mentioned to students that there were no organizations sending free books to people incarcerated in West Virginia. We did some research and realized there really weren't any in this region of the country, and we decided to create one. We spent 2 years collecting paperbacks, raising money, and finding a workspace. Our office is in a small donated room in this beautiful all center. It's part of the Morgantown Public Library. We were joined by teachers, librarians, lawyers, activists, artists, people with family members in prison, formerly incarcerated people, people who've worked in prisons, and many, many students. We carved out 6 states to focus on: West Virginia, Virginia, Tennessee, Kentucky, Ohio, and Maryland. And we began to call ourselves the Appalachian Prison Book Project. So here's what we do. We mail free books to people in prison, create book clubs in prison. We pay tuition costs for incarcerated students who are enrolled in West Virginia University classes. And we engage the public in conversations about mass incarceration, abolition, restorative, and transformative justice. Our work is grounded in the belief that education is a human right. In 2012, about 8 years after our founding, we became a 501c3. We're a volunteer nonprofit and one of about 50 prison book projects in the country. And as far as I know, there are not any in South Carolina. I do believe there's 5 in North Carolina. So if anyone is interested in setting up a kindred project, I'll be very happy to consult on that. Since 2004, we've mailed almost 50,000 books to individuals in Appalachian prisons. We have an official student wing of APBP, the WVU student organization, which assists with fundraising, social media, and special events. This is a picture of a 2-mile community walk organized by students. And this is one of our work study students with a t-shirt that she designed for that walk. Here are students doing a book drive on our campus for LGBTQ materials. Each week, we receive about 200 letters from people in prison who are looking for something to read. Those requests include sci-fi, westerns, poetry, how to draw, learn music, start a business, books on indigenous histories, LGBTQ literature, African-American literature, sacred books, Chinese philosophy, legal dictionaries, books in Spanish. One person wrote, I only want books on West Virginia history. The most requested book is the dictionary. One of our helpers helping to mail books here. I'm happy to say we now have an electronic log, but for years we kept handwritten logs of our outgoing mail. Over and over, letter writers tell us that reading is a lifeline. It's a refuge. It's a place they can go. Here are two quotes from letters that capture some of this. A person thanked us for a legal book we'd sent and said, I was able to litigate an amended sentence order from life without parole to eligibility after 15 years. In other words, you helped save my life. And this was from a student volunteer who gave us this quote to use on our social media. Reading books about philosophy is the only thing that got my brother through his 10 months in jail. I'm glad APBP exists and that I found my way to it. APBP is powered by books and by a love of reading, but it's always been about more than that. It's also about communication and human connection. I can't tell you how many times I've walked into our crowded office and heard volunteers discussing a letter or trying to find the best possible match for a request. For some volunteers, reading handwritten letters is the first time they've thought about solitary confinement, family separation, strip searches, what it means to be sick in prison. The letters, each one vivid and idiosyncratic, also tell a collective story about mass incarceration. People often include beautiful artwork with their letters, or as you see on the screen, draw on the envelopes. So I want to show you some of this artwork, and I've asked Rayna if they would read quotations from our letters as I do that. So Rayna. Oh, Rayna, you're muted, Rayna. I'm sorry. Can you back up?
I apologize, everyone.
No worries.
Okay, I'm going to start over with the first quote. I want to tell you all that I really appreciate the service you provide. It reminds me that we are not all forgotten and there are people like yourself that still care. I have always enjoyed reading and my family simply can't afford to buy me books. I got your info from a fellow inmate that gets books from y'all. Could you send me some books so I will have something to read? I'm on protective custody and the library hardly ever comes back here to bring us books. I'll read anything you send to me. I am currently locked in my cell 23 hours a day, so you can only imagine how much mail means to me. Will you please send me a dictionary with a zillion words in it? I am 60 years old and have been in prison 23 years with life to go, but I can read even the smallest of print. I stayed up and read the book all night. I really did enjoy it and I thank you. I love reading. I have one more request for a Scrabble dictionary. That would stop a lot of fighting here when they're playing the game. My mom passed away last year and I've been having a hard time and the books are very appreciated. Keep on doing what you do because you are saving lives for sure. I'd go crazy without a good book to read and our library is very small when we get to use it, which isn't often. I hope that you and your family are staying safe from COVID-19. It's getting worrisome in here and they won't be honest with us about confirmed cases, even though we see them take people away. Stay safe and thank you for your assistance. And this last one, this may sound corny, but it is such a great uplifting feeling to hear your name at mail call and receive a package with a book that can take you beyond the bars and further than the stars.
Thank you so much, Rayna. I never tire of hearing those quotes. I often tell students that, the best way to learn about prisons is, of course, to go inside. And I'm just so happy about this education program you all are building. But another really great way to learn is by reading these letters. they're in education. This is one of my favorite examples of what we call envelope art. We're working on a book manuscript of artwork like this and excerpts from letters that have arrived over the years. You also, if you go to our website, we have a blog that contains writing by incarcerated people, as well as recently several blog posts by student writers, interns at APBP. So despite the overwhelming evidence that arrives in our PO box every day, the firsthand testimony about what reading provides, books are suspect in carceral environments. We have a list of about 30 prisons and jails in our 6-state area, or a 6-state region that we send to, that will not accept our books. They only will accept books if they come directly from a publisher or a distributor. In other words, unless they've been paid for. PEN America calls this kind of content neutral restriction the largest book ban in the country. Like all prison book projects, we navigate a labyrinth of restrictions. Federal prisons require all packaging to be white. Some prisons won't accept packages with labels. So years ago, we switched to a return address stamp. We do our best to remove any adhesive glue that might be on the cover of a book. Most of our books are used books in paperbacks. We always try and get, books in good quality and good, good books, and also to have a range of books, because as you know from what you've already heard, the requests are very, very diverse. So we really have to have a very large library. And I say library, but these books are for people to keep, right? So they don't have to return these books. Some prisons require pre-approval forms for someone to receive a book. So we have to fill out that form and return it and then send the book. Some will not allow a person to have more than 3 or 5 books. We learned that one prison has been telling people they need to mail our book home or have it destroyed. This is the first line in the form letter that goes out with all of our books. Last year, I think it was about a year ago, I got a message from a father who had been he sent his son who was in a jail a puzzle book, and he sent it through Amazon. But he got a message that it had been rejected because that jail only accepts books if they come from a publisher. So not even a distributor like Amazon. So that was news to us. So I called that jail and I asked, I wanted to confirm what the policy was. And I was told, yes, the book has to come directly from a publisher. And I said, so like Random House or Simon & Schuster? And the person said, yeah. And I said, well, okay, so this father will need to find the publisher of a puzzle book and then order the book from that publisher and have it sent to your jail. And she said, she was really nice. She said, yeah, except for we don't accept puzzle books. I said, do you know why? And she said, I have no idea. It's just the policy. So to explain restrictions, officials usually cite a security fear that contraband, namely drugs, will be smuggled in through books. Prison book projects have been doing this work since the early 1970s, and there hasn't been a single documented instance of contraband getting into prison through a prison book project in those now 50 years. So if you're serious about eliminating the introduction of drugs, targeting prison book projects is wasted effort, as is placing heightened controls on visitation with family and friends. These punitive methods only increase people's isolation. An investigation by the Texas Tribune and the Marshall Project found that just as many drugs have ended up in Texas prisons during the past year when mail was curtailed and visitations were suspended as in years past. So these are not the primary routes that drugs get in. John Lennon, a journalist who's imprisoned in New York, explains what would make a difference. Restrictive policies didn't deter me from smuggling drugs. Opportunity did. In recent years, the rollout of tablets in New York, Pennsylvania, and Washington was followed by attempts to put into place statewide policies that would eliminate access to free books. Massive organizing by prison book projects managed to stop those proposed bans, but this conflict is going to continue. So we've been educating ourselves about prison tablets, their cost and quality, the contractual terms and the profits made by telecommunications companies. We're not opposed to tablets. It is a joy and a relief to me to be able to communicate more easily, more quickly with my friends who are incarcerated. But we are opposed to financial exploitation. These costs are often passed on to family members and friends, and we want to ensure that people who want physical books can still access them. So I want to play, with Dr. Morris Cody's help, a 3-minute clip from my friend Ronaldo Hudson. I do this work in large part because of my friendship with Ronaldo. I met him in the mid-1990s when he was on death row in Illinois. And with my dad, we collaborated on several projects, a writing contest for people incarcerated in the state of Illinois. Out of that writing contest, we published a book, a collection of essays. And then, and this was really Ronaldo's, dream, we started a prison newspaper that continues to this day. It's called Stateville Speaks. So I'm very happy to tell you that after 37 years in prison, he went in when he was 19, 12 of those years on death row. Ronaldo was released last September. And he's participated, he came and visited one of my classes last semester, and then he participated in a conference just in January in West Virginia with Rayna and with me, and he spoke about tablets. So Dr. Sally, could you cue that up?
My loved ones $150 to purchase for me. And I couldn't leave it to anyone back into prison. And there's hundreds of people that would need it. But I really want to make this point to try to put this in context. If for the history buffs that's here, Buffalo soldiers were paid a salary of $13 a month to fight for civil rights. I received $14 a month washing clothes right before I left prison back on September the 1st. In fact, I need to send back and get my state pay because they still owe me, right? But when you think about that, like I washed on an average 30 bags a day. And they would do things like when I talked briefly about the Stockholm Syndrome and understanding it in context, they would badger you about those jobs like, how dare you not be up ready to work for this 13 cent, this 50 cent? Are you serious? There's several hundred people that we can continually mistreat that's willing to do it if you don't do it. So chop, chop. And so it's so humbling to know that the public is concerned about this exploitation because it does happen and it's continuing to happen. And so I want to make sure I add my voice to those that are saying, hey, what are we going to do about this? Because incarcerated people are simply incarcerated citizens. And at some point, we're going to return. I'm 37 years. I was 37 years incarcerated. I returned. And it's only because of the love and the work of people like you, Katy, that I'm sane, that I'm not, angry at society because of the neglect, right? But I also recognize my responsibility to share the message of hope. Despite the exploitation, there's hope in moments like this. And so I want to make sure I make that point. The other thing I wanted to really just hit on for a second is when you think about the copay, like those tablets, like this, I still have this tablet, by the way, $150, right? I hold my door open with it as of right now because it won't work, right? But why? Why do my family, if they want to stay in contact with me and the state is paying for me to be there, then if they want me to be rehabilitated, and most people want to see people come out of prison fixed better, why would my family have to suffer because of my bad decision. The state decided I couldn't handle myself, so it's now your responsibility to help me to be better. And so telling me you're going to exploit me, but then I shouldn't get out and try to exploit society, you're teaching me a twisted concept.
Thank you, Dr. Sally, for help with that. Yeah, so Ronaldo went on to talk about how amazing it was on the tablet to view speeches by Martin Luther King, by Fred Hampton, by Angela Davis. And then he said when he got out, and as he says, he hit Google, he realized, he's even more shocked to realize how much information is unavailable to people in prison. Danielle Sered, who's the director of Common Justice and the author of Until We Reckon, says that being around trauma means that we're also around transformation. And that's certainly the case with Ronaldo. In 2014, APBP organized an educational justice and Appalachian Prison Symposium. Our keynote speakers were Dwayne Betts and 2 directors of higher education and prison programs, Kai Stevens in Alabama and Rebecca Ginsburg in Illinois. Our opening panel featured 3 men who were able to leave a nearby prison and come to present. And Dr. Morris returned to campus and also gave a talk. Connections made at that symposium led to APBP's first book club. Our book clubs are a blend of college level literary studies and the popular form of the book club. We've had book clubs in a women's prison, a men's prison, and a prison camp. Our goal has been to generate a collaborative space for intellectual and creative growth in places predicated on extreme punishment and degradation, and that can often be hostile to books. 15 incarcerated members and usually about 4 volunteers would meet every week. Participants decided together on what to read. Those were really fun meetings when we, sort of battled over what books we would read next. Discussions were expansive, full of insight and humor, and became, in the words of one of our original Inside, sort of founding members, Jeannie, a catalyst for friendships across the compound. Members arrived at our meetings with their own poems and essays that they wanted to read. So we began to alternate discussions between books and doing writing workshops. And I thought of the book club when I read this line in Dr. Morris's gorgeous short story, if you haven't read it, you must, A Room with a Door, which is set in a women's prison. All we have are stories and we share them. Celeste, a storyteller, a painter, and a former book club member, described the book club dynamic this way. It was magic in the most simple formula. Introduce a space, lay common ground, and the result is organic healing. Reading the poet Adrienne Rich was like learning I could mix red with blue to find various shades of purple. I'm grateful to prison staff who made book clubs possible, often having to fight to protect this educational program. 2 of the book clubs compiled collections of their creative writing and artwork. These are also available on our website, and you're seeing the cover here of the women's collection. They named it after themselves, Women of Wisdom, and that title, that cover was collaboratively designed. Someone doing the words at the top, someone else doing the artistic phoenix, and someone else doing the word cloud. And this was the cover of the men's creative writing collection, which was called Holding On to Sand. Our logo for APBP was created by a book club member named Maurice. So we use this on our materials with his permission, and we also have an intranet sort of friendly version of that, but this is the original sketch that I love so much. And he also did this banner for a closing ceremony for an Inside Out class. Rayna and I teach classes as part of the Inside Out Prison Exchange program. And last year we were able to make those classes credit bearing for all the students. And we're working now with WVU and a community college in hopes of creating a pathway to an associate degree. for incarcerated students. Those of us who teach inside prisons learn immediately that the teaching is already happening. The community building is already happening. We understand our role as providing support and resources to those peer mentors and teachers, like Ronaldo. They are the ones who live there. There are elements of this work that we can measure, and a world of it we cannot. APBP builds at the crossroads of research, teaching, direct support, activism, and advocacy, ethical realms that can be reinforcing or in conflict. Volunteerism has the potential, in Rebecca Ginsburg's words, to take on the values and imperatives of the carceral state and to become yet another repressive force in incarcerated individuals' lives. Slowly at APBP, we are finding ways to integrate organizational and personal self-reflection into the work. In this way, we want to build a community of care, action, and accountability. And to do this, I think we need the same clear-eyed understanding that Mariame Kaba advances in her new book, We Do This Till We Free Us. She writes, white supremacy is maintained and reproduced through the criminal punishment apparatus. In the world of higher education and prison, I'm especially grateful for the leadership of Jami Sisterhood, Doctors Bahia Muhammad, Bria Willingham, and Aaron Corbett, who are creating public spaces to have real conversations about racism in the field. And they are committed to increasing the number of Black and Latinx educators who are doing and leading this work. I want to just pass along some suggestions that I found helpful that were offered by white practitioners to white practitioners at a recent Jami sponsored event. Find friends and colleagues who are white, who could be a good accountability partner for you. And you go to your accountability partner and you ask, did I do the right thing? If a white person is trying, to understand racist violence, histories of racial violence, and maybe saying things that are difficult to hear, instead of distancing ourselves or rolling our eyes at that, we take on the responsibility of that conversation, and what will probably be a multi-part conversation. We always become more aware of privilege, recognizing what we receive and what we are spared, not because of anything we've done, but because of how we are perceived. And this seems to me the work of a lifetime. We amplify, center, and support the work of Black people, Indigenous people, and people of color, and we listen, and we listen, and we end white saviorism, the false notion that white people are saving Black people. Years ago, Teju Cole called out how having what he called a big emotional experience is too often broadcast and accepted as doing justice work. We can't go inside prisons and be transformed and then return to campus and communities and not notice discriminatory policies and practices. It's necessary to be mindful too that higher education contributed to the construction of the largest prison experiment in the world and in human history. That this doesn't have to be the relationship moving forward. To go through prison gates is to feel in your bones the accuracy of this line from John Weidman's memoir, Brothers and Keepers. Power was absurdly apportioned, all on one side. Toting in books for mothers who may have lost custody of their children, or doing a workshop knowing the writers will likely be unable to share their name publicly, analyzing a poem when it is not possible to acknowledge the fullness of the pain in the room, it can feel like complicity and like never enough. The structural iniquities that deprive people of education, healthcare, housing, employment, the criminalization of poverty, addiction, and mental illness, the systemic targeting of Black, Brown, and Indigenous people for arrest and prosecution, the failure to hold the system of policing accountable, the discrimination and the obstacles that await people coming out of prison, the often abysmal treatment that survivors of harm and violence encounter in the legal system, and the needs of victims that go unmet in the short and the long term. These conditions are not resolved by a really good book. We do not romanticize reading, but we don't underestimate it either. The last 17 years have taught me how essential it is to think intersectionally, to connect with allied organizations, to build coalitions, to extend compassion and grace toward ourselves and others. APBP is now part of a nationwide alliance of prison book projects, and that's such a glorious thing. And we're part of an amazing statewide coalition that is focused on criminal legal reform. I'm so happy about a new organization led by and composed of formerly incarcerated people in our state. It's called the West Virginia Family of Convicted People. The way that Dr. Morris and Dr. Morris Coady pivoted in response to the pandemic is a perfect example of the work we have to do the work. This series of talks and the correspondence exchange have already, even before your first Inside Out class, built a bridge between the place of incarceration and the place of higher education. You're doing the courageous work of learning together in public. James Baldwin understood that love is the only way, quote, to end the racial nightmare and achieve our country. In his last essay, Baldwin wrote, and I've been thinking about this line so much, complexity is our only safety, and love is the only key to our maturity. I want to thank you again for being here, for your presence. As I said on Friday in our informal conversation, it is a remarkable and beautiful thing to see my students grappling with these urgent ethical questions about education, equity, and justice. I want to close with the words of a brilliant writer and Inside Out graduate. His name is Craig. Tangible love is the heartbeat of Inside Out. It pumps blood to broken hands, healing and preparing us to continue the work. The only sane way to respond to love like this is to make it count. So I hope that Rayna will come back on camera, and then we would be really happy to answer any questions that you have.
Dr. Ryan and Ms. Momen, thank you so much for such an engaging presentation. My name is Jordan Zahora, and I'm a sophomore member of the FPEP student group. We have had a number of questions come in from our audience over the last 45 minutes. Remember, if you have a question you would like Dr. Ryan or Ms. Momen to answer, please submit it in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. So with that, let's get to it. So our first question is, for someone who wants to donate books, what types of books does APBP accept, and what are the most popular books among incarcerated people? And then can books be mailed to specific people?
Yeah, so thank you so much for wanting to help. So the main thing about book donations, and we do get book donations from across the country, but we also encourage people to find a prison book project close to them, right? So you have all of those ones in North Carolina, and they, it might be less expensive, to get some books to them. And what I'm about to say about in terms of our needs is probably true for most prison book projects. That is, the most requested book remains for all of us, the dictionary. We only send paperback, or we try to only send paperback. There's about 30 prisons in our region in those 6 states that I mentioned that will accept hardcovers. So if we happen to have a right fit, for one of those prisons and it's a hardback, we can send it. But in general, for donations, we just ask people to give us only paperbacks in good conditions. We always can use dictionaries. We can always use legal dictionaries. We can always use how-to books. And I think, again, this is true sort of across the board at prison book projects, how to play a guitar, how to cook, how to garden, how to live off the grid, how to start a business, how to do woodwork, a lot of drawing requests. electrical, wiring, HVAC, anything, any kind of how-to, because people are thinking about what they want to do, later. We also get a lot of requests for popular like mass market books like thrillers and sci-fi and fantasy. This was a story I told the group on Friday, but we were running low on fantasy and sci-fi recently, and so we took a picture of our empty shelves and sort of tweeted it out to the world, and it went viral for us. Like, it was picked up and shared like 11,000 times or something, and so we were inundated with fantasy and sci-fi books. So we're good on those for a while, but those do, they fly off the shelves. And like I said, our volume, is high and again, same with everyone else. Everyone's getting, it tells us, right, how great the need is. All projects are inundated with letters. And also you can go to our website and we have a page, it's called Donate, and there's how to donate money and there's how to donate books. And that has even more specifics of sort of and we try and keep that updated about what books we need. And in terms of sending to a specific person, no, we don't do that. We only, people have to request. So you could tell anyone who knows someone who's in prison in our 6 states, by all means, give them our address, right? Which is, I can tell you, it's PO Box 601, Morgantown, West Virginia, 26507. But if you go again to our website, you can find that address, and then they write to us, and then we can send them a book. I'm going to share, with the group, Google Doc that also will have a link to all of the prison book projects in the country. So that will be nice to share for people who are in other places.
Yeah, that's awesome. All right. So the next question is, when first starting APBP, were there any prisons that were hesitant to receive book donations?
Yeah, that's a good question. The main obstacle has been the policy restriction that some just won't accept books unless they're coming from what they call sort of a third party, so a publisher or a distributor. But we've been able to make the case that we have a really strong track record. We're an educational nonprofit. We have sort of quality control measures in place, and so usually if we make an appeal to a prison or jail that is hesitant, we send them some materials. They can, check out our website. We're often able to then get approved as, say, what they call like an approved vendor, even though we don't sell books, but like an approved nonprofit. But that just takes a lot of time because that's one-on-one sort of communication, and that may or may not work. So I wouldn't say there's been early on. In some ways, I don't know, this would be interesting. We're able to track our data now better now that we're not doing it by, hand. And we are sending out more books every year, but we also we're trying to keep track of patterns, right? So if there's certain states where we were sending more books to and we're sending fewer to now, we're sort of paying attention to that. Yeah, so there's, I'd say we're still able to send a lot of books. We send to about 200 prisons in that 6-state region. So we're able to get into a lot, but there are places we're unable to get into. And that's really, really disappointing.
Right. So the next one is, could you speak more about the LGBTQ book drive and then kind of explain why you chose to focus on this genre?
Yeah, that's a great question. So that happened during the pandemic, and we did go remote with our sort of operations during the whole past year. So we came up with a way, normally everyone's doing the work in our workspace, but we came up with a way that people could bring books home and wrap them and bring them back. So and sort of seasoned volunteers, everyone has to be trained and all of that. But it was sometime during that I think it was toward the very beginning of the pandemic. We were just low on books. It was the same thing. We just realized, look, we're low on this. And there was a student who was doing, actually, she was part of a think tank that had grown out of our last Inside Out class. So both of the Inside Out classes that I've taught have had think tanks. We were able to merge with a think tank in one, and then we created one in the other prison. And this student was coming in for those think tank meetings. and wanted to do more. And I was like, well, you know what, like we're low on these LGBTQ books. So she took that and did it as part of an internship and created that beautiful flyer that you saw. Yeah, that was really good. So doing those sort of specialized drives is really great because you want to be able to give people what they want, right? And if they're writing, it's painful if they're writing, you know, and they clearly need something and we don't have it. So I think it was just an alliance that sort of things aligned. We had a student, she was really motivated. We had a need.
I would actually add to that because it also coincided with an essay that I had co-written with another longtime volunteer with the Appalachian Prison Book Project. He is an English professor, also at WVU, former English professor. So we were writing an essay for a book, and that essay didn't end up coming out yet. And it was on, you know, the outreach that the APBP does to LGBTQ people, or how we respond to people that fall under that, fall on that spectrum. So it really got us to kind of revisit some of the letters, and it really kind of prompted this idea to make sure that we're able to really better highlight when we're getting requests from people that are, you know, historically marginalized groups. So we've definitely, it's definitely led to something more that grew out of that. And I believe the book drive did coincide with that as well.
Yeah, you're completely right. And thank you for reminding me of that, because it's a good example of what I was talking about how we're trying to integrate like reflection and critique as we're doing it. And events like this help us do it, because we have to sort of talk about like, what are our priorities? What are our challenges right now? And writing that essay, it was the same thing. In doing the research, we realized there was something we were missing on our shelves, you know, what it needed to be bulked up. So that's one of the beautiful things that can come out of this work, is just the ways that these areas, right, interconnect.
Yeah, it's really awesome to see how that all kind of fell into place there. So the next one, I'm interested in myself too, being a part of the group, but how can students best support incarcerated individuals?
Wow. That's such a great question. Well, I think there's many ways, right? I think that writing letters is really important. And we have a lot of prison book projects have either a formal or an informal pen pal program. And we're just kind of reinvigorating ours and going to make it more formal. And I know from watching, as I said, sort of people interact with these letters, the impact it has on them. And many of us over the years have sort of developed pen pal relationships with different people through APBP. And so that matters a lot, right? I mean, any way that you can cut down on the isolation and increase the human connection is so important. You know, there are, you know, and then being able to talk to someone, video call, if the place allows, you know, I'm able to video call with more people now. And that is just, you know, it's just great, because again, it sort of reduces that sense of being so locked away. People, you know, need resources. So if you're able to help them, you know, with books, that's great. Those of you who will be going in as students and working, oh, that's great to see a writing exchange already with Perry. That's awesome. Yeah, I mean, I think that's really, really important. And then when you go in, you know, it's going to be a mutual exchange, right? Of, you know, that's, you know, Ronaldo said something about, you know, me helping him stay sane, but that's entirely mutual, right? My sanity is all bound up on his wellness and on people getting out, and all of us, you know, creating a more just culture. So for me, these things are all, yeah, interconnected. I love that question. Thank you for whoever asked what's the best way. And also supporting family members of those who are incarcerated is so important, and because that can be very isolating as well. And there can be stigma attached to that. And so we need to, you know, we need to dismantle that. We need to lift one another up.
Yeah, definitely. It's interesting you bring up the writing exchange, because I was going to say that we have been doing that. And I remember like how powerful of an experience like it was for me getting that letter too. So you're totally right. It's that mutual
both ways. It's beautiful, Jordan. That's great.
So the next one is APBP inclusive of incarcerated people who don't speak or read English fluently?
Yeah. So I just today texted a former student of mine. This is the thing about APBP. Like I don't let anyone get away. So I'm like still like texting people who grad. And here's Laura like doing this today. But I just texted today a student of mine from years ago because she speaks Spanish, and I needed a form letter for the book that we're putting together of artwork and quotations from letters. We need to reach out to someone who wrote in Spanish. We need to send that person our form letter in Spanish. So we need to translate the form letter. So we do our best, and we do try and keep, and we have right now a very nice selection of books in other languages. And because we're connected with the university, which is again, why if you all want to do this, it's really great to have a prison book project connected to a university, because you have this like ample, supply of books available. So yeah, we do our best on that front to have books in other languages available. And then we have, the university, again, when we can't read a letter, if it comes in a language that none of us speak, we're able usually to find someone who can help us with that.
Definitely. This next one's kind of related to that.
Mm-hmm.
It's asking, what does literacy look like in prisons? And then is this ever a barrier for incarcerated people who receive books, or are there other resources for these people?
Yeah, that's a great question. And I'm not sure I can answer that very fully. I'm always been aware that we're reaching through the book project, people who can write and read, right? So we may not be providing needed materials to people who are unable to write a letter, right? And those rates are much higher, people who don't have sort of the basic literacy skills for everyday living. Those rates are higher for people who are incarcerated. And do they have what they need? That's a great question, right? Those of you who'll be going into Perry, find out, because one of the things that is so important, I think, with educational programming inside is that as much as you can, you want to seed the whole place, right? So you want to facilitate, again, there's going to be mentors and teachers already there. They're already doing the work. So when you find them, ask them what they need. Like, what resources do you need for that peer mentoring you're doing, or for that, fundamentals of reading and writing class you're doing? What can we get? Because then you're at Furman, like you can go and get some workbooks and things to them. So I don't feel like I can answer the question about what they're getting. Prisons are required to provide, GED equivalent type education. So that is mandated in all prisons and jails. And Rayna, is there anything else about that or the other questions that you wanted to jump in on?
And that's a huge question, and it is really great. I'm glad someone asked as well. I couldn't really answer that so much, as a couple of things came to mind that aren't really directly answering the question, but things to consider. It's like, in my experience, there are prisons where people's only access to, they're using a typewriter. So they may be doing all of their writings on a typewriter. We've had students in our classes who did, research papers, and they hand wrote in the endnotes and footnotes, the subscripts. I mean, they're doing this college level equivalent work, but they're doing it with very limited resources, but they're presenting it in the same way, just with what they have. So certainly no internet access, that's a given, but things that you may not really think about. So going into it, thinking about the differences in technology, individuals don't have the opportunity to sit there and, look things up on the internet. Their libraries may contain a lot of books, but those books may be incredibly dated. So the resources that they have may just not be remotely up to date. And so they may be benefiting from people being able to, I would look things up if questions come up in class, and be able to bring that back to people in the next class meeting and whatnot. But those are really a couple things that came to mind, is just seeing someone turning in a paper that's on a typewriter, and that they're still doing footnotes and endnotes, and exactly what you would see on campus, but with very different resources.
Yeah, I definitely could not imagine doing it that way. And this is all very helpful for me too, because I'm one of the students who has plans to go into the prison in the spring. So hearing this gives me definitely some good information here. And speaking of that, this question is directed towards Rayna. So it says, how did you get involved with APBP as a student? And then can you please share more about your inside out experience?
I don't know. I was involved with APBP as a volunteer prior to becoming a student. I'm a non-traditional student who just returned to school in 2016 for my PhD. So I'd had a master's and a bachelor's that I'd gotten quite a few years ago. But so I'd been familiar with the Appalachian Prison Book Project. And actually, I think the first time I ran into anything related to the organization was I was shopping at a local co-op and saw just literally a jar of fundraising for APBP. It was probably before they actually even got their first space. So
Wow.
I'm born and raised in Morgantown, in the same town as where it's located. So it's always been familiar to me since pretty much they started. My sister's also heavily involved in the organization as well. So my entry to it was prior to becoming a student. And once I returned to school, knowing that they had a student organization, it certainly made sense for me to be involved in that and be an officer at some point as well. Can you remind me of the other part of the question?
It was just asking about your inside out experience.
Oh, okay. Yes. So I became a teaching assistant for Dr. Ryan's, the first class she taught inside out, and it was at a federal medium security men's prison in West Virginia. So after taking a grad level class with Katy, she invited me to be a teaching assistant. So that was really my entry into that experience. So I was a TA along with one other student on the outside, and the experience was life-changing. I'd already had my master's. I had taught at WVU undergraduate sociology classes, both in lecture and online, excuse me, but it wasn't until stepping inside that I realized what I wanted to do and what I think I was meant to do was to have that different audience teaching courses inside prisons. It was just one of the most meaningful experiences I've ever had. We brought in WVU students, so half the class was on campus. And it was just a really rewarding experience. It's pretty indescribable. The very next summer after that fall course, I ended up getting inside out instructor training, and then being a teaching assistant for Katy another time in a state maximum security prison in Pennsylvania. So I know that that's what I plan to do after I finish my PhD, and just really dedicated to increasing access to higher education for people on the inside and people that are leaving prisons. And I'm doing a lot of work around that now as well.
Yeah, that's awesome to hear. I feel like just being a part of the group has been so meaningful so far. So and hearing you guys talk about what it's actually like inside the prison has me really excited for it. But that's actually all the time we have for today. So thank you guys again so much for sharing your story with us. And everyone, don't forget to donate a book or two for the students at Perry Correctional. As you heard tonight, books bring knowledge and the world to those in prison. And then you can find donation boxes in the library, in Trone, the bookstore, and other locations across campus. And so this session concludes our speaker series for the academic year. We hope to see you back next year to continue learning with us about mass incarceration in the criminal justice system. If you want to learn more about FPEP, you can visit our website, you can post in the chat box, or write to us at fpep@furman.edu. So I hope y'all have a great night. Y'all are free to go.
Thanks, Jordan.
Thank you.